Just a fair warning before the video begins. This video will not be spoiler free. I'll be going over my thoughts of this book, including spoilers. Right, so I've just finished reading Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells, which is the third book in the Murderbot series. Now, in the last video I made about the first two books of the Murderbot series, I was quite critical of them, even though I liked them overall. I must say this book is, for me, quite a big improvement in many ways over the last two. And although I liked the last two, this one definitely felt a lot stronger to me for pretty much every reason that I said was bad about the last two. It's improved upon the series in those respects. Still not perfect, definitely not, and still not necessarily fixing all the problems I had with the books, but overall I think this is the strongest book in the series so far, and I really enjoyed it. The end kinda made me tear up a little bit, not gonna lie. I had pretty serious, well, not serious, but a little bit of an emotional impact on me, and in a way that I haven't had with the other books. The first book kind of hit me in the feelies a bit when Murderbot was kind of shitting on themselves for things that are out of their control and going on about how horrible their situation is, but the second book really didn't have anything like that for me at all. To be honest, it was mostly just funny. This one, overall, definitely affected me a lot more emotionally, and I connected to Murderbot a lot more as a character in this book than I did in any of the previous books, by a long shot. So I think I'll just go on to quickly go over the things that I liked and touch on the things that are still things that I'm not that into about these books. So I just want to say that Murderbot as a character goes on strong in this book, which is good because the books are all about Murderbot, and if something was up with Murderbot, then we would we would have problems, because that's basically what these books are about. And if Murderbot is not being a good character, then the books might as well not exist. So happy to say that Murderbot continues in all of their sassy, depressed, and angsty glory. They are still a very empathetic, sympathetic character that I really want to see continue to evolve and develop, because they do in this book. They come to some realizations about the relationships between humans and the relationships between AI and how they can be, maybe how they should be. Murderbot leaves in the first book, leaves Mensa, because Murderbot doesn't want a relationship where they are being owned by Mensa, kind of, as an object, and kind of sees that relationship between humans and constructs and AI like that of between a person and a tool. People can be fond of their tools, but that's it. I think Murderbot in this book at the end comes to the realization that it's possible for humans and AI to love each other and see each other as people, in the truest sense of the word. Murderbot sees some shit in this book, and it can no longer deny the fact that at the very least one of the humans in this book loved their AI companion like a family member, and that AI companion proved to Murderbot that it was capable of putting others first, even though it was programmed to put itself first. And it kind of goes against its programming to help others and to commit an act of unconditional love, which up until this point all the AI that Murderbot has met have only done that, or only had that kind of relationship with humans because it's part of their programming. And Murderbot even thinks that about itself a little bit. It feels like it kind of has to help people because it's part of its programming and not because it wants to. And this kind of causes Murderbot to have a bit of a realization about what they want to do, and so they are going to go back to preservation and basically reunite with the characters in the first book, which I'm looking forward to seeing. So Murderbot, again, these are short books, so you're not going to expect like these long rolling character arcs. You expect small developments of the character over time, and you expect them to evolve slowly, bit by bit, and Murderbot does that in this book. And if you're here for character, you won't be disappointed. The character elements of this book are the best so far, in my opinion, of all the books, but I've only read the first three, of course. Murderbot's still really good. and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Murderbot does in the future. So the plot. The plot is kind of one of the weakest parts of these books for me in general so far, for the first 2 books anyway. It's very character driven, so it's very based on what the character wants to do, and the plots are usually just a means for Murderbot to achieve a goal and get from A to B. But this one was quite interesting. Basically, Murderbot wants to get onto a station that is owned by a corporation, the corporation that were involved with the shit that went on in the first book, to try and get some dirt on them to help Mensa out. And the way they end up having to do this is by sneaking on a ship with a bunch of people that are going down onto a station. And there's some dodgy shit going on in that station, and some of the people who are going down with them are maybe not there for the best reasons, and maybe are not to be trusted. And Murderbot gets involved. And it's a very simple plot, it's a very A to B plot, but it kind of has Alien vibes. I don't know why, but I was getting the same kind of feeling as in the first Alien film, with the kind of the way the crew were and the way they had these like relationships and they're interacting with one another. Still not exactly a blow-away plot. I mean, you're not going to be reading these books for the plot, quite frankly, but it was a massive improvement on the other books, which kind of felt like they didn't really have a plot at all. But yeah, the plot in this book, I actually enjoyed it for what it was. These books do, like I said, have a massive benefit, and that is that they're only about 150 pages long. So the plot's obviously got to be short and to the point. I'm hoping to see that evolve in the actual full-length novels, but you know, we'll see. But this is an improvement. The plot's okay in this book. It's serviceable. It does what it does. It's interesting enough. That's a good and a big improvement. And if you're a big plot reader, to be honest, you're probably not going to even make it to the 3rd book. You're not going to make it to Rogue Protocol if you're big on plot with these. Probably. You're probably going to have decided pretty early and it's not for you. But if you do like plot and you care about plot, you're not going to love this for that, but you're going to find that need met a lot better than you are in the previous books. So overall, a massive improvement, and I thought it was okay. I'm not really a big plot reader myself. I'm a very character-driven reader, so it's not that big of a deal for me. But it was nice to see it improve, and for the things that are going on to be a bit more interesting, rather than it just be about Murderbot. This is also about the world and things that are going on, and that was interesting. It was cool to see. Big thumbs up there, big thumbs up on the plot. It's just a massive step up really from the previous book, well, books. So yeah, good to see. This is going to be the longest section because this I thought was the strongest part of this book, and it's really what made this book stand out to me by the end when I finished it as being pretty good, because this book kind of touches on the theme and idea of can a human and AI love each other. And this is one of those things where this isn't from Murderbot's perspective, but Murderbot does observe this and come to a realization about how the world is in this respect, and that was really cool to see. The AI interaction between Murderbot kind of being grossed out by this other AI called Miki and its relationship with its owner. That is the relationship between its owner and it being one of familial love, basically. And Murderbot kind of not knowing how to deal with that, not being equipped to deal with that. And then at the end, during the climax, one of the characters takes a pretty serious action, which is basically an act of unconditional love for the other, and the reaction to that from the other character kind of cements in Murderbot's head that this thing that they've been hiding from and been worried about and been scared of not being possible with themselves and Mensa and the humans of preservation, that it is possible, and that Murderbot maybe should go back and give them a second chance, like they didn't at the start of the first book. So overall, I thought the character arc in this book was really good because of that, and also that concept was well explored, as well as you can explore it in a 150-word short story anyway. The ending had a really big emotional impact on me in this respect, like I mentioned in the intro, and overall I just thought that this was a massive improvement over any of the other books. This one element of this book was done so well that it carried the book, and along with Murderbot and its interaction with this theme and idea itself as a character, and kind of the narrative weight that held. It's a very hopeful theme and idea for a series of books that are very bleak, and I think that the reason I like this so much is because this book touched on this idea that I have with fiction for me, which is that grim dark fiction, or dark fiction, because I do think that the world of Murderbot is quite dark and quite grim. It does need moments of light to cut through the darkness. You know, they say that brighter lights cast harsher shadows, and the opposite is true as well. You kind of need light in the darkness for the darkness to not just be smothering and all-encompassing, and for it not just to come across as just pointless. Like, sometimes when fiction is hopeless and there's no glimmer of hope of things getting better, or the themes and ideas being presented as like an ultimately good thing for the world, you kind of sit there and you just kind of like, wow, this is depressing. I can't really connect to the characters because it feels like they're just going to die and they're just going to suffer, and there's going to be no meaning to their struggle because they're never going to get things are never going to get any better for them. The world's never going to give them a crumb of respect, a crumb of nothing. And these books kind of touched on that idea really well by having Murderbot kind of, you know, Murderbot's life's been kind of empty, apart from their short relationship with Art, and they're just kind of moving from A to B and drifting. Their life's kind of been empty, and they've been looking, whether they realize it or not, I think, for a reason to go on, for a long-term goal, for a place to be, a place to call home, somewhere to just kind of be themselves and just live. And I think this is the spark, the beginning of that idea being born within Murderbot. And I thought that was really well done, and it was done through the exploration of AI interaction between Murderbot and this robot, and also between this robot and a human. And thought Martha Wells nailed this on the head, and this is what this book was all about. So that's that. The AI interaction and the theme of this book were great, and I thought really elevated it. So the next thing I want to talk about is the side characters in this book. Now, I did go on in the previous video about how there's just so many fucking side characters that are pointless. This book still has that, but to a much lesser extent. All the characters in this book serve some kind of narrative purpose. I've thought about every character, and I thought about every little thing that happened, and I'm like, okay, this thing couldn't have happened unless that character was in the story. That being said, this book still has the problem, and it is because it's a novella, and I am going to be much more forgiving on this one than the others, because there are a lot of characters in this book, and they are named. I still have the problem where I cannot fucking remember who half of them are. So in this book, the crew that go down to the station get split in two. Half stay on the ship and half go into the station, okay? The ones that go into the station, I remember perfectly, and because they were continuously involved, I remember who they were, okay? And I could separate them in my mind and the scenes. I could not fucking do this for the characters on the ship, but that's fine, because they only exist to serve a few narrative purposes, and they're barely there. You just need to remember their names and know they exist. There are basically two security consultants. One of them goes with the party, one of them stays on the ship. Okay, you just need to know that there's one on the ship and there's one that goes with them. The one that goes with them obviously gets way more time and you kind of know who they are. But the one who stays on the ship, you're kind of like, what the fuck is going on? Who the fuck is this? But it's fine, you know? It's fine in this book because they don't really do anything apart from serve the narrative purpose that they need to be on the ship and they need to be a problem that they're on the ship, so that there's a hostage situation. That's it. That's all you need to know. There's one guy on the ship who is loyal and who they contact to get some stuff done on the ship. Boom. Dead simple. Can't remember his name or her name. Couldn't tell you anything about them as a character. And this is still a problem, in my opinion, with the way that things work in this book. I feel like there could have just been 4 characters in this whole book. There could have been 5 actually. There could have been 1 loyalist on the ship, 1 security consultant on the ship. Then the people who leave could have been the person who gets kidnapped, the security consultant, and then the leader, and then obviously Miki. But I'm not counting Miki because Miki is, besides Murderbot and Abin, the most important character in this book. So yeah, what I'm trying to explain is this book still has this issue, but to a much lesser extent. And I think that's mostly because the plot in this book's a lot better. It's a lot more better. The construction is a lot more interesting. Things that are going on are interesting. The characters are different in that the security consultant is memorable because they have a gun and they're in armor, and then Abin is the leader and they're the one giving the orders, so you know that they're the leader, and it kind of flows a lot better in general with the characters, but it still has the issue where there are characters who just don't give a fuck about whose names turn up and you're like, who is that again? I read this book over the course of 5 days. It took me about 3 hours to read in total. I'll be honest with you, the characters will get introduced. I didn't read it for a day. Then by the time I started reading again, I could not fucking remember who half of them were, and I had to relearn who the characters were. This is a big problem, in my opinion, but it's kind of the nature of a series of books, I think, where you have a different cast of characters every book. And I'm hoping that this won't be as big of an issue later on, when Murderbot goes back to preservation, and we have a continuous cast of characters throughout every book. Okay? The problem is, they introduced like 8 characters in like 3 pages, and you're expected to remember who the fuck everyone is. It's like the book just shotguns information at you, just info dumps you, and you're expected to just retain all that information and not forget. I'm not the kind of person who just remembers stuff that's just told to me. There needs to be some kind of reason to remember it, that means I struggle to remember the names of these characters. It's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. In this book, it is nowhere near as big of a deal as in the first 2. Not even slightly. In this book, all the characters feel like they're there for a reason. Even if they're not all memorable and they're not all interesting, they actually serve a narrative purpose. Unlike the first book and the second book, where I feel like the cast could have been cut down by half, at least, in each book. But alas, this book, this is a massive improvement. I'd say it's still but at the same time, it's but much better than the previous books. So, yeah, big improvement there on the characters, which is very important in my opinion. This is a very, very big thing that you need to get right. It's not being got right, generally speaking, I don't think, in this book, but it doesn't really matter because there's only a few characters who actually need to be remembered, really, so it's kind of fine. It's a mixture of the fact that it's a novella and some characters aren't really that important for the narrative. They're just there to serve certain narrative purposes and create situations for the plot. It is what it is. Overall, still a massive improvement over the last 2, so that's good. Another big improvement in this book for me was the action. One of the biggest problems I had with the first book was that the action was just shit. And the action was just okay in the second book. The second book, there was some cool moments, but the action in this book actually fucking slapped. Like, it actually straight up slapped. Murderbot does some really cool stuff in this book. Murderbot fights some combat robots and uses some cool tactics to basically hack into the security systems and use the security systems against the Murderbots. The combat robots, so they're actually capable of fighting them. The combat robots themselves are just actually genuinely terrifying. They will contact Murderbot and just tell it what they're going to do to it. Like, there's this bit where Murderbot is basically about to fight this robot, and it just contacts Murderbot over the feed, and it goes, "Objective: kill intruders." That's all it says to Murderbot, and then it just starts attacking, and they're just these huge titans with loads of arms, and they're just designed to kill. They're just really cool, and the action scenes against them were really fucking cool. Murderbot's being a badass as usual in this book, but also not a Mary Sue. It's a fine line to walk. The action in this book genuinely was riveting. It was interesting to read. It flowed so well. What was actually going on in the combat was way better. The description was just so much better. Like, I could understand what was going on so much better. It wasn't a case of Murderbot's starting to learn that because they don't have a cubicle anymore and they can't just heal anymore, they're actually going to have to start to learn to use tactics in combat and actually be clever about fighting. They can't just walk in and shoot at enemies and then get shot and hope that that'll be fine. And this really shows in this book. So yeah, the action is really good. The action scenes were memorable and badass as fuck. So overall, thumbs up here. Just a massive improvement over the previous books, in my opinion. Lastly, I just want to go over some things that were problems in the previous book that continue to be problems in this book. This book still has mid as fuck prose. The description of the combat is definitely improved. It's no longer confusing, which was good, and I thought that the action was overall really well described in this book compared to the previous one. But in general, it still has this kind of confusing way of describing how the people move around the kind of area and stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, trying to tell you about all the different parts as if like I'm supposed to have a mental image of how this place actually looks, but I don't, because it's not being very well conveyed to me. And I thought that things can still be poorly described in this book. This was less of an issue because the characters in general kind of serve more of a plot relevant focus, and their appearance doesn't really matter in this book as much because they're mostly wearing things to cover their faces anyway. For example, there's power armor in this, and it's just kind of described as being power armor. That's fine because I guess it allows me to create my own mental image of it, but at the same time, it's kind of it could do with being described a bit. I don't know. Same with projectile. I really think these books would do really well if they just had between chapters like just a schematic, like a picture of just an outline schematic of like a piece of equipment to give us a rough idea of what it might look like, and we can imagine the details ourselves. That would be really cool. Obviously it's way too late to implement that. These books already exist and are already being written, but little illustrations like that I think would really elevate these books and would make them much better, and really help with this. But these aren't in the books, unfortunately. Nothing like that is in the books, so I still think the description and the prose are they can be a bit shaky, definitely. That being said, the prose for the action is just so much more improved, and the action scenes are no longer confusing to work out what the fuck is going on in terms of where people are and positioning and stuff. Yeah, so overall an improvement, but still not where I would be willing to say that it's good. It's shaky at best and inconsistent for sure. Yeah, these are still problems and negatives that I have to say about these books. I can't just ignore them. They're pretty big problems in terms of my enjoyment for these books, just because, you know, it's hard to enjoy things when you don't know what the fuck's going on, or you can't imagine the scene very well. These are the only books I've ever had where I'm struggling to imagine stuff. I'm sure there are other books, to be fair, that I just can't remember, but these are like one of the only series of books where I've like struggled to imagine what's being described to me, because it doesn't really get described. Now this may be because of the low page count, I don't know. I don't want to say that it is, because it could just be that the description's bad, but it could be because of that, definitely. And if that's the case, then I'm willing to give it a bit of a pass on that, but it does, like I said, affect my ability to visualize what's going on, and it does affect my enjoyment quite a bit. That being said, I'm going to go on to like my final ramblings and kind of finish up talking about this book. So, the last things I have to say about this book. This is a big improvement over the previous one. Over the previous two, sorry. This is my favourite one so far. I think from the perspective of Murderbot as a character, from the perspective of the themes and ideas presented in this book, and also when you're taking into consideration all the things that I think are massive improvements over the previous books in this book. This book's a massive step up. This is an entire tier or two above the previous book for me. I really liked what this book had to offer. I found what it had to say interesting, and it had a bigger emotional impact on me than I expected that it would. So, you know, there's not really much else I have to say apart from I'm still looking forward to seeing what happens with Murderbot. I'm really looking forward to seeing Murderbot go back to preservation and chill out with Mensa and that lot and see what happens. It's gonna be pretty great. I think I will be starting exit strategy in the next couple of hours, actually. And then I may, depending on how I feel about that book, make a video on it. The reason I made a video on this one is because I was surprised by how big of an improvement I thought this was over the previous books. If I don't have much to say about the next one, then I will just fold it into an overall video about the books in general later down the line. But yeah, really impressed with this one, I have to say. Murderbot's gone up from being a series of books I just think are okay and I like mostly, to quite like. I quite like this book. So if the others keep up this quality, I'm really gonna go on to enjoy the rest of these books.